Hey guys, Will or Lolio here, and today I'm showing you Auchindoun, another dungeon in Warlords of Draenor. For those of you familiar with the Burning Crusade, this is where dungeons like Sethic Halls, Shadow Labyrinth, and Mana Tombs were located. So here we get to see the place in its full glory before it exploded, and wow, I think it looks awesome. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the Draenor aesthetic, so seeing this place intact makes me really happy. Now, while the structure is undamaged, Auchindoun has some stuff going on. It's been infiltrated by members of the Shadow Council, including teron'gor, one of Gul'dan's chief lieutenants. This means you'll see a lot of Burning Legion influence here, which is a nice change of pace from all the Iron Horde dungeons in my opinion. Like, I was getting a little bit tired of stuff like Bloodmaw Slag Mines and Upper Blackrock Spire. This one looks a lot different and has a very different feel and vibe. You also fight members of the Sargerai, who are Draenor who I guess have decided to join the Burning Legion in the Shadow Council. The storyline here is actually pretty interesting, and it continues from a bunch of quests in both Shadowmoon and Talador, but I don't want to spoil too much here. When it comes to difficulty, the dungeon felt fairly easy, but that's probably because level scaling was off when I attempted it. For whatever reason, level 100 characters weren't being scaled down accurately. A watcher made a post in the forum saying that the characters on Mechatork, the level 100 pre-mades, were not scaling down entirely, or maybe not scaling down at all. And so that definitely affected this run, because myself and another guy were both using level 100s, but overall I've heard from people who only use level 90s that were scaled up, that this dungeon is still fairly easy. The first few trash packs seem to have a few abilities. I noticed a frontal cone, as always, I mean pretty much every trash pack has one of those these days, a heal, and a mind control called Bend Will. Now, both the mind control and the heal are interruptible, so if people are paying attention, it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but if you've done Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, you'll notice people tend not to interrupt. It seems like interrupts are becoming a big deal in trash again, so I would recommend, telling people, hey, watch the interrupts for the mind control, watch the heal, because it is pretty important, and certain bosses have interruptible abilities as well. The first boss, a Draenor defense construct, has some interesting mechanics. The first is called Sanctified Strike, so an area on the ground will be highlighted, showing where it'll hit, and then an effect similar to Consecration will be placed there. Pretty much just don't stand in it. It doesn't do much damage, but you want to avoid it. His next ability, Holy Shield, is pretty important. So he throws one of the shields on his arms at one of the party members, so they need to avoid being hit by it because it does do quite a bit of damage, but the cool thing is, it stays planted in the ground. So all group members need to stand behind it pretty much right after that, because he starts doing his next ability, called Consecrated Light, which does massive AoE damage to everyone not behind the shield. Because most of my group didn't know the mechanic, they died to this, but we were able to kill it anyway. Because this is one of those insta-wipe mechanics, make sure to explain this to your group before the pull, because if people don't know it, they're not going to stand behind the shield, and they're probably going to die. The trash after this boss came in some small packs, and you can probably pull more than one. All I noticed here was a stun ability and a few things to not stand in, but the trash here was pretty simple overall. The second boss, Soulbinder Nyami, has another stand here or die mechanic. So she channels an ability called Soul Vessel, which makes a purple zone, kind of like a Death Knight's anti-magic zone, appear on the ground, and you want to stand in that to avoid the AoE damage pulse, which hits pretty hard. She'll also spawn some Draenor ads, which are similar to the trash you just faced in the hallway. It's a pretty simple fight, and the ads have so little health that they really died before they could do much of anything. Honestly, this boss felt more like a named trash mob at the moment than a real boss. On the way to the next boss, you'll start encountering demon trash. The Abyssal will fixate on a target and can't be tanked, so just kite it around. The Felguards have a frontal cone stomp ability, and the Imps didn't seem to do much. This trash is basically just an introduction to the next boss's mechanics. The boss, Azakel, aka Green Balrog, felt tuned fairly well. He'll use an ability called Fell Lash on the tank, which acts as a knockback and makes them take increased damage. He'll also put a dot on a player, called Curtain of Flame, which will spread to any other players within 5 yards, so if you have this, move away from your group. Every once in a while, Azakel will use an ability called Claws of Argus, which will summon demon ads, and these are basically the same as the trash you face in the hall. The Fell Guards need to be tanked and faced away from the group, while the others just need to be killed quickly by the DPS. While the fight is pretty simple overall, I think this one has the most potential to be great on Heroic, and it could be really hectic depending on the tuning of the ads. The trash before the last boss is comprised of a couple of warlocks. Really, they felt more like an introduction to the boss's mechanics rather than any type of real threat. The final boss, teron'gor, is really undertuned at the moment, but his mechanics are kind of interesting, at least on paper. In the first phase, he'll use standard warlock abilities like Shadowbolt, Corruption, Drain Life, and Rain of Fire. Now all of these can be interrupted except for Corruption, which is an instant cast dot, but the important thing to note here is that Drain Life will heal him every second he's allowed to channel it, and that's really the only one you have to worry about interrupting. The others don't really do much damage. When it gets to 75% health, he'll absorb the power of one of 3 Draenei souls, which gives him a different set of abilities. Basically, this turns him into an Affliction, Destruction, or Demonology Warlock, and it's random, meaning each time you do the dungeon, it'll be a different fight. So my group got the Affliction one, so I'll start with that. He still uses Shadow Bolt and Drain Life, but his new abilities are Curse of Exhaustion, which is just a really annoying slow, Agony, a hard-hitting dot, Unstable Affliction, another dot which does damage and silences whoever dispels it, and Seed of Corruption. Seed of Corruption is probably the most important one to watch, because it applies a dot that does moderate damage, but when it expires, it'll do an AoE pulse to anyone within 10 yards, and it'll put the debuff on anyone nearby. Make sure to avoid spreading this to your group. If teron'gor goes Destruction, he'll use standard Destro abilities like Immolate, Conflagrate, Rain of Fire, Incinerate, and Chaos Bolt. Chaos Bolt and Incinerate are both interruptible. Obviously interrupt the Chaos Bolt to avoid getting hit incredibly hard, and you should be fine. Lastly, if he goes Demonology, he'll use abilities like Curse of Exhaustion, Doom, Corruption, Touch of Chaos, Demonic Leap, and Chaos Wave. Chaos Wave is a frontal cone spell that does quite a bit of damage to anyone hit by it, but it should be pretty easy to sidestep. He'll also use Demonic Leap on a random party member, but you should have enough time to avoid being hit by it. It does AoE damage and has a knockback, so try to avoid it. While teron'gor has a lot of abilities, very few are actually meaningful, and both his HP and damage are very low at the moment. On Heroic, I'm sure this will be somewhat interesting, but I'd say even mechanically, it's a bit lacking for a final boss of a dungeon. Compare this to Skyreach or Upper Blackrock Spire, and you'll see what I mean. Overall, I'd say this dungeon is pretty solid. The tuning bugs make it hard to tell what the intended difficulty is, but it definitely has potential to be great. Visually, it's a nice break from all the other dark, orky dungeons, and there are some nice spell effects. Anyway, that's the end of the dungeon. If you enjoyed the video or found it informative, please leave a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.